Right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Fintelekt ABA training program on cybersecurity and customer fraud. My name is Shirish Pathak. I head Fintelekt, and it is my pleasure to be your host for the session today. I am delighted to announce that we have over 1,250 registrations for the session today. Thanks so much to ABA for getting so many people together. So, as you know, today's session is intended to be a session on cybersecurity and customer fraud. And this is targeted at sharing of information and best practices on adopting and managing cybersecurity measures and in dealing with and protecting one's bank or organization from customer fraud, as well as on relevant government policies and regulations governing cybersecurity and customer fraud. The training program will be followed by a short assessment, not today, but later. And participants who pass this assessment will be issued a certificate of participation. So please pay attention carefully as the trainer speaks. You will receive a detailed email after the session on how to access the assessment and earn the certificate. Obviously, if you have any questions during the session, please post them in the Q&A window so that the trainer can address them after his main presentation is over. Let me also invite Meg Moreno from the Asian Bankers Association. Good morning, Meg.
Good morning.
May I request you to say a few words?
Good morning, Sirish, and good morning, Dr. Skiba. We're very glad to hold this training this year because for this year, 2022, the Asian Bankers Association have two main objectives. One is cybersecurity, and the other one is the digitalization of banking. And as part of this year project, we think that bringing Dr. Skiba here is a very important part of the objective of the association to train and disseminate these key issues among commercial banks in Asia. So I'm very glad of the reception that we have received over 1,200 registrations from all over Asia. So I think banks in Asia know the importance of this issue, and no better than Dr. Skiba to give us some hints and some deep understanding of the risk and the pitfalls that banks right now are facing in this new world where, because of the pandemic, everything have accelerated and we go digital now on every aspect from onboarding up to the end of transactions. So this issue of cybersecurity is really key for all banks. So for that reason, thank you for accepting our invitation. And Sirish, now your turn.
Thank you, Meg. Thanks for that. And well, I think it's now time to introduce our trainer for the day, Dr. J. Michael Skiba. Michael, good morning and welcome to the training program.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here for sure.
Super. So before you go ahead, Michael, let me just introduce you to the audience so that they understand you better. So Dr. Skiba is also known as Dr. Fraud, and he is an international expert in financial crime, cybercrime, and professional development for the academic, public sector, as well as private sector. And he is referred to as one of the top crime fighters in the world. Michael has worked for two corporations for 25 years in special investigations and management, and now owns his own international company focused on consulting, training, and speaking on financial crime, cybercrime, and professional development. He has worked on hundreds of projects across the globe, including Malaysia, Argentina, Singapore, Mexico, Germany, USA, and the Nordics. Michael has also been a university professor for 15 years, and he is currently Department Chair of Criminal Justice at the Colorado State University Global. He holds an MBA and a Ph.D. with a financial crime focus, and governments, corporations, and colleges from around the world regularly call upon him to consult, train, and assist with financial crime, cybercrime topics and strategies. Michael is also an instructor for the US ATF and a member of the Academic Council of the United Nations System. He is an accomplished author and has recently published a book called The Psychology of Fraud. And he is also the host of DFTV, that is Dr. Fraud TV, a show dedicated to investigating scams and fraud around the world. With that, Michael, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's late night for you. I think maybe 10 o'clock your time last night for us. Thanks for joining at this time. And it's over to you.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Shrish. Thank you, Mig, very much for the introduction. And absolutely so excited to be here. And, you know, it could be any time of the day or night for me. I'm so passionate about this topic. I was just mentioning, we were just having a chat ahead of time a little bit, and I do a lot of this training in person, but due to the pandemic, I've been on Zoom. So a lot of these sessions have been from midnight to 5 a.m. for me. And it's amazing because, you know, you would think on paper before I do those sessions, wow, how am I going to make it through it? But the reason why I do is because I love these topics. I'm so passionate about them. I could talk for hours and hours. And that's why when we started chatting about this topic, you know, cybersecurity and customer fraud, this is so near and dear to me. This is an area I've worked in for almost 30 years now, in various capacities, you know, levels and lateral across the globe. And I think that's what I love to discuss is, you know, the experiences that I have everywhere, because there's certain things I've seen, let's say in Argentina, that are going on in the Nordics that maybe have not been over in your region yet, or vice versa. You know, they're coming, they're not as advanced, they're more advanced. So these are things I love kind of putting those pieces together and doing these training sessions, you know, to just create that awareness, that discussion about this topic. And this has to be the most timely topic right now. I mean, we know cybersecurity is just, I mean, you can't go any day right in the news without hearing of something, a breach, and you know, why it's so important for our industry. I always say this, I mean, we are the financial industry, right? There's a word finance in our name. So criminals love that. I mean, it's like a draw. It's like, you know, the refrigerator that's full of food. They're just coming at us. They know that the food is there. So right off the bat, we are at an incredible disadvantage. You know, they think we have money falling out of trees and, you know, we're taking private jets everywhere. I mean, this is what they think. And that's why we're at such a disadvantage. And what I want to do, what my hope is that I give you enough information to be dangerous. And that is, you know, we're going to walk through systematically some things to think about. We're going to talk about the trends first. You know, I want to really get an idea to all of you about the incredible impact and where, you know, why cybersecurity is an issue. Is it just something that the criminals decided to do overnight? No, there's actually a lot of things in the works that kind of funnel them to this. So we're going to talk about that first. You know, then we're going to actually get into best practices. And that's the area that I love to chat about, because that's when I want to talk about some very specific things from a technology level, from a human level. I'm going to kind of talk about some approaches that when I do projects, that companies utilize that are successful in identifying cyber and customer fraud, you know, and how to do that, you know, from a technical level or even just a human level, you know, depending on what resources you do or do not have. We're then going to talk about COVID. You know, as Mig mentioned, COVID just changed the whole world on many levels, but very directly what our world is, you know, how we deal with customers, how our banks are dealing internally. I mean, there's so many challenges there that we were forced into that you know, we're not forced out of them. They're going to continue. You know, these things that were put in place and happened a couple of years ago, because people are used to these platforms now. And I want to talk about that a little bit and how that's going to, you know, continue to change and alter, you know, what we do. And then we're going to talk about regulation and what I'm seeing there. And then we're going to talk about some training and awareness. And, you know, it starts basically right here, just like we're doing, you know, just talking about, you know, what's hot, what's not, you know, talking about ways to implement training that's, you know, that's the most useful and effective for your, you know, for your particular organization. Okay, so that's kind of the roadmap. Super excited. As Sharice mentioned, you know, we're going to run probably an hour and a half or so, and leave a lot of time for questions at the end. And then, we want to make sure we get everyone's, everyone's feedback after, and then I'm available too. Now, my contact information is here, so definitely reach out to me. I'm heavily involved in social media channels. I love to stay connected, and I publish all kinds of free stuff out there. So definitely connect there, and more than happy to help you out with that front. Okay, so as we get started here, I want to kind of throw this out there to you. So the first thing I want to talk about is vulnerabilities. And first is kind of a question. So you see this castle here. Now, normally, like I said, if I were doing this in person, we kind of do a little Q&A, but this is a real castle, and I want you to maybe take a guess at what castle this could be. I mean, maybe you can just put it in the chat if you want, or write it down for yourself, but just take a minute and think about it. And I'll give you a hint. This is a real castle. It's not something I took out of a book or a movie snapshot. And I want to tell you a story about this. So this actually, if you guessed it, I'll give you the drum roll. This is actually is in Romania. This is Transylvania Castle. Okay, so this is Dracula Castle in Transylvania. And what I will say, I don't know if anyone has been here, but I had the pleasure of going here about 5 years ago for work. Decided to take a side trip, Transylvania Castle, because I always read all of Dracula's books and found them fascinating. Went to the castle, so I have to tell you a story about this that's related to fraud. So go to the castle, doing the tour, and we're talking to the tour guide, and the tour guide was very evasive with his display of Dracula. As far as where Dracula stayed and lived, he was really skirting kind of the specific details. So I questioned the tour guide, and basically what I had discovered from him was he couldn't really substantiate that Dracula had stayed in this castle. Okay, when I was there, so I did some research before we left, and what I did was I found out that it was never historically substantiated that Dracula stayed at this castle. Okay, so to any fans out there that are Dracula fans that watch Netflix shows and movies, this is true. I think there's history that maybe he stopped there, at some point in time, but that was basically all. Okay, so basically what we did from there was I decided to do some research. I found out that Dracula actually lives at a place called Palerny Castle, which is about 3 hours the opposite direction. So we take a trip to the Palerny Castle. We get to the trailhead, and at the trailhead, there's no one there. It's a dilapidated car with a few tires off it. It's an older woman sitting in a seat, and she says, yes, the Palerny Castle is up the trail. And she said, well, what I didn't realize was Count Dracula had produced and flown in these very dangerous bears, and they were still running loose. So basically, what happened was she told us, she said, well, you are free to go up the trail, but she said someone got mauled here yesterday from the bear. So me and my friends are looking at it. It's a true story. Me and my friends are looking at each other, and we didn't still know whether to go up this trail or not. And she said to us, she said, well, sir, she said, you don't actually have to outrun the bear. She said, you just have to outrun your friends. Okay, so this is a true story. So we decide, well, moral of the story is we decided not to go up the trail. But here's where I'm getting at, and here is where it relates to cybersecurity and customer fraud. I got thinking about this on the way home, and this was about 5 years ago. And ever since then, this has been my theme whenever I talk about cybercrime, cyber breaches, customer fraud, cybersecurity. This is basically what you want to think of. Okay, now the bear is the fraudster, the scammer, the threat actor. Okay, and that bear is never ever going to go past the slower runners, the slow runner in the back with the camera, and pass all those slow, easy targets to go after the gentleman in the green shirt or the black shirt that are the fastest. Okay, so what I want you to think about in your organizations, wherever you sit within the organization, whatever your role is, it's really kind of incidental. I want you to think of outrunning your friends, not necessarily outrunning the bear, okay? But what you want to do with all of the strategies and everything I'm going to talk about this morning is think about ways to make yourself a harder target, okay? Using technology, using human-based approaches. Our jobs got a lot more difficult after the pandemic, okay? And there's many reasons for that, which we're going to talk about. But I want you to just think of this. You don't have to outrun the bear, just outrun your friends. Now, what I mean is that, you don't want to, you're not in competition with everyone else that's on this call, the other, 1,200 or so people, your ABA colleagues, okay? What you want to do is just think of make it harder to push them elsewhere, okay? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit with trends in cross-border and things that are happening there. Okay, but this is what I see in cyber. Okay, so always remember that's kind of a theme. I want you to kind of remember that as we go through this and after we get off the call is make yourself a harder target. Don't be that easy prey in the back. Make it a little bit harder. I've seen it hundreds of times and the threat actors will go else there. They're going to find an easier target. Okay, so what I want to do, I want to talk a little bit about some trends. Okay. Now, some of the major, there's a lot of things to think about when we talk about trends. But one of the most, one of the keys that I want to really key in on is technology. Okay, so this is the biggest trend that we're seeing right now. Now, what about technology? Well, this is what we're going to explore a little bit. Okay, so when we talk about, technology, I want you to think about statistics like this. So take a guess, just take a guess and you can write it in your notes. Just a few years ago, how many connected devices did we have in 2018? So just think about this for a second. You can maybe write your answer down. So I see some answers coming in. Fantastic. That's great. So we see a lot of A's and B's coming in. I'll let everyone just kind of think about it a little bit. So in 2018, we had 15 billion devices. Okay, so everyone in the B range was correct. Okay, so again, we had 15 billion devices. That was only a few years ago. All right, that was 4 years ago. Now, here's what's just as disturbing. Now, I want you to think now, just 2 years ago. All right, so how many connected devices now? So remember, we had 15 billion in 2018. So 2 years later, and 2 years ago, just take a guess. So I see lots of C's and D's. Excellent. Very good, very good. So the correct answer is actually 50. Okay, 50 billion. So if you look at this visual, if you look at this visual on the left-hand side, this shows the trajectory. Okay, so if you look at this right here, this is where we were. All right, so look at this. If you just look at this line here, right, this slow trajectory. We had a big jump here, but that was 7 years, right? So 0.5 to 12.5, and then 2018. But what I want you to look at is look at this trajectory from 2018 to 2020. Okay, look at these devices. Now, what I've seen disturbingly is around 21, 22, and well, this year, of course, hasn't been released yet, but last year we were somewhere around 70 or so. So it's just continuing to grow at an absolute incredible, immense rate trajectory. Okay, and that's what's disturbing. In just 2 years, we doubled. Okay, and one of the reasons why 21 was a little bit slower was just due to, as many of us know, supply chain issues. Just making new phones and devices and whatnot. So that created a very unique challenge for us all the way around. Okay. But this is one of the main things that we are faced with right now is is this technology overload, okay? And what you see on the right here, is kind of a comical representation, but basically it talks about, the overloaded human, okay? So this is also what I want to kind of talk about a little bit is, when we think of technology and that trajectory, okay, human beings, we have a certain level, of technology that we can handle, of information we can handle, okay? It's kind of like a computer. You know how when you run out of storage, what happens to your computer, your laptop? It gives you a message. It says, you have no more storage, right? This is the thing with humans. There's no stop. There's no warning that comes up. We continue to ingest it, but what changes is us. We become overloaded, okay? And that changes the way that customers actually behave, okay? And what I want to talk about a little bit, and we're going to get to this in actual discussions when we talk about strategy, is we're going to talk about how to use this. Now, this is the key, because there's an incredible trend with this data, but alternatively, with all of this data that's out there, okay, we can also use that to our advantage. Okay, so we can utilize all the technology platforms that are out there. We can utilize all that information. Okay, and some of the most successful banks, some of the most successful consultations that I've worked on, we call it harnessing that power. Okay, so if you can kind of, if you're maybe taking notes, I mean, that's kind of an interesting, kind of theme, if you will. Harness the power of the data. Because a lot of you have data, a lot of you can get data, and actually trying to manage it and bring it and use it to the best of your ability is absolutely the key. Okay, and we're going to talk about that under strategies and how you can actually how you can do that. Okay, but the lesson here is absolute information overload. Okay, we're being bombarded with information from every single angle. Okay. Now, the Internet of Things. So this is another area of growth. So if this is something that, maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't, this is something I started to hear in the technology cyber world maybe 10 years ago, bits and pieces of it. But this is where the world is going. Okay. When I talk about those connected devices, what I mean is anything, it's not just a phone or an iPad, or even a laptop. Okay, as you see here in this visual, the Internet of Things is everything. Okay, so there are so many things that are out there that have data points in them. Okay, and this is what we call like the ecosystem, the world of technology. Okay, and this is why the cyber world is changing significantly. Okay, because as you see here, I mean, many of you, maybe that have pets. Pets actually have, and some of you might have these collars that have GPS trackers on them. They have the ability to monitor heart rate and heartbeats and breathing for a dog. And that information can come back to a watch or a phone. So an owner will know, what the metrics of the dog are. Well, something as simple as that's bringing data into a system, into somewhere. Okay, but that's all customer data too, right? But all of these things on here, vehicles have tons of data. They have tons of computer systems in them where you can just plug in and see what's wrong with a car. Those are all data points. Work, home, cameras. I don't know if anyone has a smart home or smart lights or appliances, but all those things are putting data into a system. And I want you to maybe remember that a little bit, because I'm going to come back to this when I talk about specific strategies, the best practices using this data, as a kind of a cyber preventative tool. Okay, but the Internet of Things basically just means the whole world is transforming into data, and what you're going to do is you're going to continue to see that trajectory continue. There's no doubt in my mind. Okay, we're getting used to, customers and, the population is getting used to more convenience, and they're not going to go back to less convenience. Okay, so they're going to keep on this path. basically, until every single thing we're doing has data points. Okay, so why I wanted to mention this is because all that is putting data into the world, into the system, into the financial services world, into the insurance world, into fintech. Every single area, it's putting data out there. Okay, and again, it's up to us to actually harness what we need, leave what we don't need. Okay. Now, when we talk about governance, okay, this is an area that is very, very important. And I don't know if your banks have any specific data governance policies, but this is an area that if you don't, I would absolutely make it a part of a strategy, or at least try to bring it up, bring it up with the appropriate people within your companies, because data governance is huge. And this is where I see a lot of companies, a lot of banks, other financial institutions really missing the mark. What I see is there's a huge gap in data governance. What I see is you either have organizations and banks that have a very, very well ingrained data governance policy, data governance committees, or I see banks and institutions that it's not on the radar. They're not even really focused on it. They maybe mentioned it at a meeting or two, but there's no strategy in place. So I find those are the extremes, and I find most everyone else is right in the middle point. Okay, so I would absolutely make data governance part of a strategy. There's tons of training that you can get on data governance, but what it is basically, as you can see in this slide here, is not only just talking about data. I just gave you some very interesting, disturbing statistics, right? But what data governance is all about is making it part, like data governance is the center of everything that you do. Okay, so it's kind of a whole different mindset. Instead of banks, you having a certain strategy, a certain mission and a vision. What you want to do is you're kind of adjusting your thinking, and you're really embracing these statistics and everything that points to the fact that data is going to continue to be a major issue, a major challenge, and a major opportunity for all of us in the financial services sector. Okay, so what you're doing is you're actually putting data in the middle of everything. And as you see around this wheel here, what you're doing is you're creating all of these policies and procedures around the data. Okay, so like what we're going to talk about later a little bit is data privacy, data security. That is absolutely huge these days. And that pertains directly to, your customer facing fraud and your cybersecurity elements. Okay, you talk about organization, like who's in your organization. Your data governance should control what type of policies. Your data catalogs, data analytics, data sourcing, data quality, master data. All these things are part of that huge ecosystem. But data governance basically, instead of this being different silos in your organization, this maybe could be your sales folks, marketing, retail, payment, and data. As part of the outside, data becomes the inside. Okay, so this is again a huge transformation from the way a lot of companies think. And what I'm starting to see is, I'm getting asked to do more training on this now than I ever have. So that actually, I think that's a good sign, because that means that companies really have this on their radar now and are starting to make this, important. And you can go all the way as advanced, as having, a full data governance committee, champions, and there's all different titles that you can have focused on data governance, but it's such an important topic right now. Again, I would make sure that this is part of that discussion that, you're having, maybe talking about strategy and implementing some new approaches based on the current, environment. Okay. Now, when we actually speak about threats, I want you to take a guess here, because this is an area that I'm still seeing. Phishing attacks are something we've seen many times in the past. But just take a guess as this is only a couple of years ago, 2019, the percent of organizations globally that experienced a phishing attack. So just take a guess at what this could be. And great participation, by the way. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I can't keep track of all the answers. This is great. I see a lot of C's, D's. I see a few A's, D's, C's. Oh, fantastic. So the correct answer here, globally, is, this is 2019, is actually 55%. Okay, so if you answered C, now I would also say if you answered D, that would be partial credit. Okay, and I'll tell you why, because that number I've seen fluctuate a little bit or increase for 2020, 2021. And the reason why I haven't put those numbers in there, I haven't seen good statistics on that. This number was taken from about 12 different sources, so I'm very, very confident in this number. But it probably is around, like, I would say 60, 65 now. Now, here's what's interesting if we think about this, if we think about phishing attacks, and I don't know if this is on your radar, it absolutely should be, because it behooves not only you as a bank, but also your customers as well, to protect, protect those internal systems. So we're still seeing these as a very big threat to banks and other financial institutions, because what's happening is the threat actors are actually using a lot of different techniques and tactics, even though I think, we are doing a pretty good job. I would say maybe like a B plus job on training and identifying these type of situations, telling our employees and our people what to look for. I still think that we are at increased vulnerability. Now, here's what's interesting about phishing attacks. If you think about these are only known, the statistics we have here. What about those that are unknown? Those are never reported. What are the ones that are just not reported at all? How do we get statistics on those? What about the companies that actually are targeted, do suffer losses, but don't report it, because of brand or reputational damage? I mean, think about it. If you as a bank, get targeted and actually become a victim to a phishing attack, I mean, it kind of, your customers might lose confidence in you. So it's a very interesting area, and this is why the scammers focus on this area a lot. So make sure that this is, I'm just seeing this across the board. I'm seeing a lot of companies just still falling short with phishing attacks. And really the key here, yes, it is, and I'm going to talk about this in prevention, is a two-tiered approach to use technology to try to filter as many of those out as you can, but really it's about the human element. And I'm going to talk about that in that very last section. We talk about training and awareness, okay? Because that really is the key. That, in my opinion, is where we're falling short, is the human element of phishing, okay? So check out some of these disturbing statistics on phishing campaigns, though. I mean, when you really look at how much impact there is, average of $1.6 million losses, 1.5 new phishing sites per month. And if you think about it, the last statistic is pretty interesting, right? We talk about 96% of those target attacks are for intelligence gathering purposes. Now, that kind of is contrary to what we hear about a lot in the media, in the news, and publications, right? About how basically the threat actors are looking for financial gain, right? But studies show that that's not actually correct. Those are maybe only the ones that make the news, right? But most of the time it's intelligence gathering, right? Because they can do more damage that way, right? Instead of just asking for $100,000 or $1,000 outright. If they get your bank's secret formula, if you will, if they get passwords, if they get internal information, employee information, dates of birth, social security numbers of your customers, right? That's where they can have some serious impact, and that's where they can multiply their actual revenue, so that's really what they're looking for. So I would say from a preventative standpoint, definitely make sure that you're looking at protecting your data. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about GDPR. Okay. But like I said, I would focus less based on the statistics I'm seeing, focus less on that, protecting the actual financial assets here, and more on the actual intelligence and how you kind of create that shield, that data privacy shield. And that again, that really comes from that data governance policy that you're going to develop. Okay, but very, very interesting. So hopefully you're focusing on these phishing campaigns. And one of the interesting things too is spear phishing. So that's more of a targeted attack. Spear phishing would basically, it's like a phishing campaign, but they're going to have more personal information. They're going to use your name. They're going to use your supervisor's name. They put more time into those because studies show that they're more successful. Okay. Let's talk about ransomware. Huge threat. Okay. And I'm still seeing these. These made big news in the beginning part of the pandemic when some of the bigger organizations globally were hit. So let's talk about this a bit. So this is the FBI. So how many ransomware attacks occur per day? So just take a guess. See quite a few guesses, CDBs. I see mainly C's and D's. Excellent. Okay. So the correct answer is actually, after my drum roll, my virtual drum roll, is 4,000. Okay. 4,000 ransomware attacks per day. Okay. Now, what's disturbing about this statistic is as I had mentioned with the last statistic, how accurate is this? This is what I think to myself, right? Because if you are the victim of ransomware, very similar to what I mentioned earlier, as a bank, are you actually going to report that to your customers? What if you're successful in getting out of the ransomware? The attack? Are you actually going to report that? So a lot of this is skewed in my opinion, but still we need a rough metric, right? So this is about as solid of a metric as we're going to get, that 4,000. Okay, so right, as I see some of this, the chats coming through, that is a lot. It's a lot. And remember something, that we're banks or financial institutions, right? They think we have tons and tons of money, right? So they're going to focus where does it make sense to focus on? An industry, let's say, a nonprofit or a charity that doesn't have, it's in their title. They just inherently don't have money, where they think we do. So this is a very interesting statistic to think about. And what I want you to think about with this, with ransomware, is some of these statistics here. So let's talk about the rough cost of ransomware. All right. So what's the rough cost of ransomware a year? Just take a guess. Take a guess here for a second. So we got 1 million, 100 mil, 1 billion, or 11 billion. Oh, good. A lot of C's and B's. Fantastic. Angelo B, Traxy, Enrique. Thank you, everyone. Great participation. I appreciate everyone. So the answer after my next virtual drum roll is 11 billion. Okay, 11 billion, the very top number there. Okay, so that's a wow. That's $1 billion. That's absolutely astronomical. Okay. And again, it's hard to put a metric on this, and I think it's probably a lot higher than that, because again, you have institutions, banks that just don't report it, don't pay it, don't pay it, don't report it, or do pay it and don't report it. because they don't want to be, on a list or, again, brand reputational damage. So this is a problem, all right, a huge, huge issue. When we look at some of the statistics, on these phishing and ransomware, attacks, a couple of things come to mind. I want to talk about ransomware for a second. So if you remember, right after it was the beginning of the pandemic, like I said, when we saw a lot of the bigger ransomware cases coming up. We had the pipeline, we had the meat packing plant. If you remember, a lot of big companies made the news. So the question of the day, with all of the media and all of us professionals were tasked with kind of answering this, was, hey, do you pay the ransomware or not? Right? I mean, you probably remember this. If we do, maybe even discussed it internally. Boy, if we're compromised, if we're breached, do we pay it? So here's some things I want you to consider. So when we were looking at statistics, I actually did some independent research on this. So here's what we found. In a small to mid-size companies, those that were targeted for ransomware, okay, about 55% that were targeted actually paid the ransomware. Okay, so they went ahead and they paid it. Now take a guess out of the half that paid it, 55%, how many were actually able to recover their data and basically got in the clear, if you will. So walked away, no issues at all. Okay, so out of that 55%. Now, if you were to just think about it for a minute, I would hope it would be high, right? You'd hope it'd be close to 100%. Here's what's disturbing. Only 52%, okay, 52% were actually able to get the data back and get in the clear. Now, I see some of the numbers coming through the chat, and I do agree. I think it's a lot lower than that. And the reason why, it's not like the old days of ransomware, right? Or ransom, I should say, where you actually, they grabbed someone physically and they said, okay, and they put them in a cell or a house somewhere, and they said, okay, to someone else, a family member, you pay me $2 million and you'll get this person back. So they pay the $2 million and they hand over the person. It's easy, right? It's tangible. In this case, ransomware, you hand over the $2 million and they say, okay, here's your data back. What's the guarantee that they didn't already manipulate the data, take the data, sell the data, give it to whoever they wanted, steal your secret sauce as a bank, okay, or install some viruses and things in that data. So when you put it back in the system, it does more damage. Okay, so these are things to think about. If you are breached, just remember some of these conversations that this is a significant issue. Now, here's something even more disturbing. All those companies that didn't pay, okay, the 45% that didn't pay, take a guess how many actually were able to recover their data successfully and got in the clear. Okay, so that 45%. So just take a rough guess. Okay. So you have 30s, 20s, 2%. I think the highest was 15. So I saw 20, I think, in there, 10%. Great. I see a 45. Okay. So are you ready for this? And I should do a drum roll for this one. So again, out of the 45% that didn't pay the ransom, what percentage were actually able to recover data and became, clear, if you will? 82%. Okay, 82% blew me away, this statistic. Okay, when I saw it, I was thinking more like, again, 20%, maybe tops 25, 82%. So just think of these things, because I personally think that if they don't pay the ransomware, they're refusing to engage, any further with that threat actor, right? And I think a lot of it has to do with intimidation and psychology, and I think a lot of the threat actors use that to our advantage when potentially they might not have as much data or might not be able to do as much damage as they claim. But it's incredible. You think about 82%. So then, again, it's really up to your bank, your company, your institution on the appetite for ransomware, if they pay it or not. Some banks or institutions I've seen don't even want to get involved in it, pay it, get out of it, as quick as possible. Totally understandable. And others decide to kind of take a harder stance on it. Okay, but statistics you have to kind of consider them, some of these disturbing statistics. Okay. But when we talk about these phishing statistics, one of the things I wanted to mention too is talking about mobile phishing. Okay, so I want you to keep that in mind because for internal threats and even to customers. So this is an increased threat too. Is a fraudster, scammer, threat actor impersonating you as a bank to your customers. Okay, so one of the threats and one of the things that I would definitely challenge you to do is to think about not only when you talk about data security, right? Don't only think about how to protect your data within your bank, but whatever outsourced providers you are using, okay, whatever vendors, partners that you're using, it could be for anything. It could be for, I don't know, a sales platform. It could be for a payment platform. I want you to think of those companies and agencies as well, because it's just as important. Okay, make sure you have a very strict security protocol when you're onboarding those folks. Or if you're going through an RFP process to bring them on board, make sure you have a super aggressive security screening process, because basically they need to be just as secure as you are. Okay, because what we find is this is an increased risk. So a lot of fraudsters are not only focusing on you as banks, they're finding out who your, again, payment platforms are, or credit card companies that you're dealing with. And they're targeting those because then what they can do is they're going to impersonate you as a bank. They're going to go, I've seen these all the time where they'll actually, I had a big case up here in Canada with TD Bank North. They had a huge problem where one of their vendors was breached. And basically what they did was they got all their customer information. They were sending the customers emails looking just like TD Bank. I mean, they used their logo, they mimicked the signatures, they actually went online and got some legitimate names of folks that worked for TD Bank. So then when the question came up of credibility, they could just refer right to the website, and say, oh, yeah, no problem, just check out this link. Here I am right here, and here's my name and number. So this is an increased threat. But once we found out what the pattern was, we actually put an alert out, put a stop on it, used some technology platforms to prevent it from penetrating any further. But it's a risk. It's a definite risk. So make sure you're looking externally as well to all your partners that you're working with. Okay, but this is what I mean by like phishing, mobile phishing. And one of the main reasons, and this is a huge threat now, is because, well, a couple of things. We spend a lot of time on our phones, number one, more than our laptops. So the scammers focus on that. But secondly, the font, it's actually a physical thing. The font is smaller. Okay, so we might not catch certain things. We might not catch that the logo from your bank is different on email than it is in the website, or signatures, or there's a misspelling. All those red flags that come from a typical phishing or imposter in the cyber world are going to come through. They're not going to be easily visible on the phone. Okay, so make sure from a customer perspective, but even from an internal perspective, even from employees that are maybe working from home, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later too. But are operating maybe on their phones, getting emails. That could be a very, very big threat as well if a threat actor is impersonating a customer and trying to infiltrate that way. Okay, so very, very dangerous. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to kind of wrap up the trends section. What I want to do is I want to demonstrate something to you, and this has to do with I do a whole segment on social engineering. Okay, and that is how to hack a human. And how humans are the most vulnerable aspect of cyber breaches and all kinds of customer fraud. Okay, so I want to do a little exercise. And all you need to do is just have a little piece of paper there. So what I want to do is I'm going to hack all of you today. Okay, so I'm going to pretend I'm on my laptop, I'm on your laptops, at home, and I'm trying to infiltrate your system, and I need 3 passwords for you. So I'm going to guess your 3 passwords. Okay, so what I want you to do is a little exercise. So first things first is I want you to pick a number between 2 and 10. Okay, so just write it down, a number between 2 and 10. So there's a little math involved. Probably you can do it in your head, but it might be easier just to write this down. 2 and 10, so everybody has a number. Okay, now what I want you to do is I want you to take that number and I want you to multiply it. And you don't have to type in the chat, sorry. Yeah, this is so actually, yeah, I should have said that ahead of time. So yeah, don't type anything in the chat. That way I can't guess. That way there's no chance that that I can hack you that way. Okay. So pick your own, pick 2 and 10 and keep this to yourself. So pick a number between 2 and 10. I want you to multiply that by 9. Okay, so multiply that by 9. And you should now have a 2-digit number. Okay, so let's say it's could be 45, could be, let's say 13, 61, whatever it might be. Okay, so you now have a 2-digit number. Now, what I want you to do is take those 2 digits in that number, add them together. Okay, so if you had 61, add 6 plus 1. If you had 45, add 4 plus 5, and so on. Okay, so add those 2 together. You okay? Now what I want you to do is I want you to subtract 5. Okay, so subtract 5. Okay, so again, just to repeat, number between 2 and 10. Take that number, multiply it by 9. Okay, add those 2 numbers together, and then subtract 5. Okay, all right, now what I want you to do is I want you to assign a letter to that number. Okay, so A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, and all the way down the line. So just take a minute and assign a letter to your number. Okay, so you should now have a letter. Okay, everybody good? If anyone wants me to repeat, just put repeat in the chat. I think everyone's okay. All right. So yeah, don't put any of your answers in there. Don't put any of your answers in there. So okay, you should have a letter now, right? Okay. So with that letter, I want you to do, you're gonna come up with 3 words from that letter. Okay. Okay, so I got 1 repeat. So let me just repeat it one more time. Pick a number between 2 and 10. Okay, multiply by 9. You're gonna have a 2-digit number now. Add those 2 together. So if it's 1 and 3, add 1 plus 3. If it's 45, 4 plus 5. Okay. Subtract 5. Assign a letter, A1, B2, and so on. Okay. Now you have the letter. Now, I want you to think first off. All right, somebody knows this trick. Okay, it's not a trick actually. No, it's okay. So I want they have a letter. I want you to think of a country that begins with that letter. And again, don't type it in the chat. Okay, so I want you to think of a country that begins with that letter. Now take the second. So now you should have a country. The second letter, circus animal. Think of a circus animal that begins with that second letter. So you have a country. Okay, take the second letter of your country and think of a circus animal. Okay, so now I want you to think of the color of that circus animal. Okay, so you should have a country, the second letter of your country, think of a circus animal, write down the circus animal and then the color of your circus animal. Now I'm going to type in the chat what your answer is. Okay, ready? Here we go. Drum roll. Gotta make sure this goes to everyone. Okay, here it goes. Ready? How did I do? Did I get everyone? Brown Jaguar. Uh-oh, Mark, we have to talk about that. Okay, so, right? I just hacked all of you. I did my magic trick, right? Ta-da! So, what's interesting about that is if you look at how I hacked you, right? It's a twofold approach. So one, some of you had mentioned it in the chat. It's the law of numbers. You know, if you look at mathematics, there's a whole science behind it. You know, it's a lot of half of what we do. You know, in our world as we deal with numbers. Well, if you look at the law of math, you know, that number combination I gave you is always going to come up with the same. So you're always going to come up with D. Right. So I knew that. I knew all that stuff I gave you. I knew that was going to be the answer. There's different ways to do that. Right. So then I took the technical, the scientific aspect of it, the first part of it. So I got you to D. But the second part is even more interesting because there's no science behind that. That was psychology. You know, as was mentioned early on, I mean, my background is really that motivational, the psychological elements of it. The second half of that was psychology, all right? Because I knew that most people know Denmark. You know, there's a couple other countries you could pick. Dominican. I think there's a third country. God, I can't remember. It's very small, somewhere in Eastern Europe. But most people pick Denmark. E, very limited. What you know, circus animals begin with E. There's only one: elephant and gray, right? So the second answer I usually sometimes get is Dominican, Dominican Republic, orangutan brown. So if you got that, then that's possible as well. But here's my point in telling you this: I just breached all of you. I just breached your system, and really, was it that hard? No, absolutely not. Okay. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're using two platforms would have prevented me from doing that, okay? One, a technology platform, okay, and two, a human-based platform. So just having a knowledge, getting information to all of your other employees, okay, on what to look for and some of the flags, and doing constant training and awareness, but also falling back on the technology tools, okay? And that's what we're going to talk about next, okay? And I think now it's, I don't know if Aripta, it's poll time. I think you were going to hop in for a second. Or Shirish.
Yes, we will just run the poll. Here it is. Yeah, I think there's a pretty clear answer there. All right, Michael, we've ended the poll.
Okay, so you're all set then, Shirish?
Yes. Can you see the results, Michael?
Yep. Has your financial institution increased efforts to combat cybersecurity threats in the past year? Yes, 95%, and no 5%. Okay, so it's definitely positive. So we'll hopefully get the other 5% up in the top part of that, maybe by the end of the next hour or so. All right, fantastic. Okay, so what I want to talk about now. So the first section, I wanted to kind of paint the picture of the threats and the trends. What's going on in the world, and those things that I talked about, as I mentioned before, those are in every single part of the world. And I wanted to kind of filter out what I thought would be useful for you in your particular region, your specific space. So what I'm gonna do is create that awareness, that technology. I mean, that should be hopefully the takeaway. You thought, wow, technology is a huge issue, huge challenge. Data is out there, it's everywhere. Let's harness that data. It's kind of like the rodeo bull, that's kind of running loose. That's the data. You want to hop on that bull, grab it, and use it. Use it the best you can. And that's what we're going to talk about in cybersecurity best practices. Okay. So this is one of the things that I want you to keep in mind, when we talk about best practices in cybersecurity. I want you to think about two basic approaches, and then we're going to talk about this case study, Carbonac, which you might remember back in 2018. But when I want you to think about with cybersecurity best practices, and I mentioned this a couple times already, I want you to think about what I call a two-tiered approach. Okay. and that is using technology and using human-based tactics. Okay, so if you impart that, and that's how, you know, when we do these projects and do this training, you know, a lot of times it can seem overwhelming. You're not sure where to start and where to plug pieces, but just start to think of things in those two tiers, in those two categories. You know, we'll kind of, everything will flow there. We'll kind of compartmentalize it. We'll organize it a little bit easier for you. Okay. So we're going to talk about both. I want to talk about, in this section here, more about technology. We're going to touch on human-based a little bit, but then we're going to get to that more towards the last section on training and awareness, because that's really what that human-based tactic with cyber is all about. Okay. But first off, I want to talk a little bit about this case study, Carbonac. You know, you might be familiar with this, you might not. It's definitely worth checking out if you haven't looked into it. This was a 2018, and this was, you know, I would say, I mean, in 2018, this was, you know, a couple of years before the pandemic. I mean, you know, hacking was big, and I've done, you know, for the last, well, like I said, I've operated in the last 30 years, but specifically in the last 8. You know, when I went on my own out of the corporate environment into my own company, that's when I really started. I always worked globally, but that's when I really started to dive into, you know, more of the international, you know, I would say banking world. You know, always overlapped in it, but that's really when I started diving in. And I would say probably around that time, you know, there were some significant hacks, but that's when it really started to get big. And this is one of the biggest cases, in my opinion. And one of the things I like to talk about in this case study, and sometimes we do this, like if we were in a long workshop setting, we actually would you know, read this and you know, really dive into the weeds on this. But there's some key pieces of information to know about this. And, you know, and then this ties into the technology approach that I'm talking about. You know, we think about this. So they hacked into, you know, a large European bank, right? So why didn't they call? Why were they able to operate, you know, so long, you know, and steal so much money over such an incredible period of time? And seemingly, you know, as you see by the slides here, which we will share later, in kind of an easy manner. You know, it wasn't really anything out of the ordinary that they did. You know, they used a spear phishing campaign, and that's really the key. That's one of the things that I wanted to mention, is that that was the key to them breaching this bank. This bank had those systems in place, you know, technology systems, but the human was the weak link. Okay, it was a spear phishing campaign. They tricked an internal employee, and basically what they did was they watched. They installed a system, you know, within the bank. They were able to watch and extract that employee's information and the other admin information. What they then did was they were very smart, though, the threat actors. They kept a very low network footprint. Okay, because what that did was they kept under the radar. So they knew what that breach point was, you know, between detection and actually, you know, like a green lighting, we say, you know, to let a transaction or a profile or whatever it might be go through. They kept a very low network footprint, so they didn't set any bells and whistles off, right? And what they did was they accessed the system after hours, okay, and they did it using admin credentials, okay. So they, like I said, they watched what they were doing, grabbed all their information, and then they operated after hours. Now, this is my point here is firstly, the spear phishing campaign could have been avoided through good training and good awareness. There's no doubt. Okay. Secondly, data analytics would have absolutely picked that up. Now, what they did was they were able to access this system very quickly. I think under 2 hours, they were able to accomplish all of this. And that's really where they fell short, was with their data analytics platform. And this is what I want to show you a little bit in some of the next slide, is how they actually could have caught that breach using those data analytics, because that, in my opinion, was the biggest mistake that they made, that Carbonac didn't pick up on, is because they accessed the system after hours. Okay, so that's what we call an outlier, and that's one of the keys to prevention using technology. Okay, so I want to show you a couple examples, and this is the part that I love. Okay, so when we talk about this, that two-pronged approach I mentioned is what to look for. Okay, so what I want you to think about is when we set up any type of analytical platform. All right, now what I want you to do is think about whatever platform you have. You could even have Excel sheets. It's totally fine. If you don't have any analytics at all the way up to really high-end software, machine learning, AI platforms. Wherever you could be on one extreme or the other, or anywhere in between. And anytime we do any type of installation with software or data analytics platform, we do whatever project we're working on, it doesn't matter what it is, we're always looking for outliers. Okay, so that's what I want you to think about. So I want you to think about how can you identify an outlier. As Carbonac, perfect example. It was an outlier. That was an outlier, a login after hours using admin credentials. Okay, so that's what I want you to think about. So in this case here, this is what we see. And what you can do, and this gets into customer fraud. This is where this is really like what we call the meat and potatoes, the nuts and bolts of how to actually get this information. So what do we call this right here? You see all this? This is what we call a digital fingerprint of a customer. So every single one of your customers has a fingerprint. Our fingerprint's unique. It's unique to us. All of us on the phone, the 722 participants that are on this, which is fantastic, by the way. All of you have a very specific digital fingerprint. And these are some things that are included in that. So for example, your passwords, your keywords, the time when you log on and off. How about some of your credentials, your IDs, the IP addresses that you actually log in from, your mouse clicks, the currency, that's huge now, the currency, right? But all these other factors, your shopping platforms, your payment platforms, right? Your location, your GPS, all these create a very specific customer profile, okay? Now, what we look for is, let's say we have this, okay? So we have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 that are green lighted. We have 1 that's questionable. We have 2 that aren't. Okay, so this is what we call an outlier, and this is a visual format. I wanted you to see this, and this is what I want you to focus on when you're looking at those technology platforms to develop a good cybersecurity policy or procedure. Is look for these outliers. So in this case, it was the mouse clicks. It's not consistent with this customer. The currency is not consistent. Why are they paying in a different currency? Why are they asking for wire transfers? Okay, it's absolutely a huge flag. Okay, so I want you to think about that. Now, here's the key to this: is that when you look at this, I want you to think about firstly your customer behavior. Okay, so what the best case scenario is to develop a pattern of your customer that's constantly monitored, constantly. Real time is best, but if you can, it's okay. But it monitors everything. So that customer profile is going to get into such things as deposits, withdrawals, transfers, non-financial events even. Okay, so let's talk about, like I said, address, a new IP address log on, a new physical location, a new PIN code, let's say. A new PIN code. What does that mean? Well, it could be legitimate, but if you have too many of those that are outliers that are being changed as once, that goes against that customer's profile. Okay, if that customer never changed their PIN in 2 years, but all of a sudden they've changed it 4 times in 2 hours or attempted to, huge flag. Okay, your system should be able to catch that. Okay, now what we do with it is the unusual behavior. The red that you see here. Is based on unusual behavior based on historical data. Okay, and that's really what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to develop that historical data from your customer. Okay, and this basically, this is just a visual. I wanted you to show this. This is how we ingest. When you talk about an internal system. There, I know it looks like there's a lot here, but like this is a visual we use when we're implementing or talking about, like an AML platform, suspicious transaction monitoring. We're talking about customer records. So this is the flow of data coming in like this, and then it's coming into a system, a server, scoring, doing all these things here, and then it's going back out. Okay, so this will go back out to the customer so they can see it in a dashboard environment. But what you're doing is you're ingesting all kinds of data, all kinds of data into here. And what you want to do with that is what you're looking to do is you're looking to develop what we call a risk profile, okay, or like let's say like a peer group analysis, because you want to compare that customer to other customers, and that's what you're doing is you're assessing the risk. Okay, and that's incredibly important with that onboarding process. So I would definitely recommend that from a fraud perspective, we get involved in that onboarding process. That risk scoring is absolutely critical. Okay, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to onboard a bad customer. We don't want to onboard a high risk customer. Okay, this is like what we see here is using like a scoring model. To actually do that, a low, medium, and high risk customer. Okay, and then you can, then like that prior slide showed, loop that back into some sort of platform. Okay. Now here's what's interesting is, I talked about that profile, that customer profile. So it's also called a dynamic profile. And it can be done. Now, this is what's interesting about this. So I just showed it on a customer level. Okay, so I showed that flow, the green and then the red, the customer profile, the fingerprint, and then the red, the outlier, the red flag. But with those profiles, you can use these solutions, to actually do other things, in addition to a customer profiling. So you can look at beneficiaries, you can look at postal codes, you can look at different jurisdictions, high risk sectors, IP addresses. So you can develop a profile. So start to think about these things a little bit, maybe postal codes, knowing what regions, have more transactions than others, or would have been breached in the past. I mean, that could create a profile of that region, and then you can adjust accordingly from there. Okay. And then the second part of that too is talking about social network visualization. So this is a big part of it, and this is an advanced system. There's a lot of the bigger software companies that have these, but I've also seen like here we see some of the this was from a mid-level bank. But what we see is we're looking at relationships. We're seeing that they have certain connections within the bank, certain accounts that are related to two different people, and they're related to certain legal entities. So these are just some interesting things to think about. So social visualization, social connections, I see this as a big growth area in our area, in the banking institution. Traditionally, it's been used a lot in law enforcement applications. We see it a lot in insurance companies. And I'm starting to see more implementations in banks from a fraud perspective. The FIUs and other areas are starting to use these more in those connections. It's important to know who's connected, or also, who's connected that say they're not connected. Okay, that's what's very important as well. So you could have beneficiaries, that are on multiple accounts. So that's kind of interesting, right? So these visualization programs are actually going to come up with those systems. Okay. Now, what you can do is, I want you to think of, when we talk about these technology platforms, I want you to think about couple ways to do that. So you can use those. There's kind of three ways. One is to use conventional algorithms, payments outside of 10,000, 5,000, account fluctuations, volume fluctuations. There's a lot of different ways to use basic rules and algorithms. Also think of like what they call fuzzy logic, which are soft rules. So these could be like high cash transactions, things that are like flying under the radar. but a softer boundary system, text system, is going to grab those. Okay, and that comes all the way into, and then the more advanced level would be like an advanced monitoring, where you're looking at pattern recognition, structuring, smurfing, network detection, like I mentioned, like money mules. This could be interesting. And then those data visualization trends. Okay. And what you want to do is you want to look at somehow looping these back into some sort of alert system. That's really the key. Okay. Because that's going to help with trend analysis, to know where to plug the holes, where to look for trends and opportunities and whatnot. Okay. And, when I talked about the data governance aspect of it, this is kind of a nice visual to look at, and it's, it's called, we call the crawl, walk, run. Where are you in that maturity phase, in everything I just talked about, the technology phase? It's absolutely incredible. When we actually, when you look at it this way, are you unaware and all the way up to completely optimized? I find most companies now, like I mentioned, are either in unaware, maybe aware to optimized. It's most that kind of fall short in that middle area. Okay, what you want to slowly do is, it's not something that happens overnight, but slowly, when you're looking at these slides later, maybe consider, where are you and what do you need to do of your IT, your technology, your governance strategy. Okay. All right. So as we start to kind of get into these different areas here, why don't you think about regulation? So that was one strategy. So just to wrap that up a little bit, we talked about technology platforms. We're going to talk about the human-based components in a little bit. So regulations, we could spend probably hours on this alone, right? I think everyone would probably agree to that. So here's some things that I'm seeing, from the regulatory side, and as far as expectations go. So one of the main things I am seeing, as far related to cyber and customer data and customer breaches, customer fraud, has to do with GDPR. So as we know, a huge issue. And what I see is even in those areas that aren't affected by GDPR, just the fact that GDPR was passed and is on a very significant portion of our industry's radar, it has put privacy issues at the head of the table. So they actually have a seat in a lot of these discussions. So here's something to consider too, is, we're talking about data. We deal in data all day long, right? Transactions and payments and customer information. What we have to consider is, for example, if you're dealing with customers across countries, and we talk about servers and where you're actually housing data from a cybersecurity perspective, it's very interesting because you can't, you have to have servers in each of those countries. That information, unless they have some sort of reciprocity agreement or exception to GDPR or some stipulation, those servers have to be secure within those countries. And it makes it really, really interesting from a customer facing, but also from a fraud perspective. So as I mentioned in that data governance section, what definitely you should do as far as developing strong cybersecurity measures is make sure the privacy, make sure you have a very, very strong privacy protocol. And that goes for internal customers, internal employees dealing with anyone who are customer facing, vendor facing, internal only. Everyone needs to be on tune with that privacy policy, which comes, right from the beginning, like I mentioned, with that data governance policy. Okay, so to have a strong privacy policy, what's released, what's not released, who to go to if there's any kind of issue or question is incredibly important. But what I'm starting to see from a regulatory standpoint is I'm starting to see more and more laws. I'm starting to see tougher laws. But even just from a corporate level, even the fact that these aren't handed down maybe as specific rules or regulations. I can think of a few areas right now where the new data privacy regulations are in the works. They're not passed yet, but it's making companies think about them and stay ahead of the game a little bit. Okay. Now, as far as prosecution, we talk about regulations. This is one area I think we're doing a little bit better on. We're still in the mid B range with prosecutions. Maybe no, I would say actually maybe C. I don't see as many prosecutions as I would like. I don't see much regulation being pushed in that area. And one of the reasons why I think that's the case is a lot of it is dependent on the political environment of the time. You need someone to support those regulations. And if you have strong supporters, that's great. But what I find is those are usually short-lived. Those individuals that might support very quickly move into other areas, and then the support actually just completely drops or falls off. Okay, so these are things to definitely consider. And I think supporting from a bank perspective, organizations like this that help support these type of endeavors is incredibly important to create that that increased awareness. And also too, so here's what's interesting. I talk about payment methods. This is a big challenge I see, and probably one of the biggest changes in the last few years is the change in the payment methods. How we're making payments, e-commerce. How that has transformed our life, our world, right? But think about it. We transformed all those models. The regulations didn't actually adjust with that as well. Here it's kind of like that slide I showed with the 15 billion to 50. It's the same thing. We had to advance all these payment methods. The regulation is still down here. It's nowhere. We're not even in the same ballpark. Okay. So regulation as far as payment methods really needs to be refocused, in my opinion. And it's one area where we can try to support. But really, as I mentioned in the last section here, we need buy-in. So laws alone won't help. And what I think what has worked in other areas is to somehow get some assistance, some resource assistance from let's say grants. That has worked very well. So if you have things that could be sponsored by the government per se, to help support that, because laws alone won't help. You need that support system. You need companies to actually buy into it, and not just support it to check the box or just have a piece of regulation sit in limbo. You need to offer some sort of resources to assist with that regulatory push once it's actually in place. Okay. Now, this kind of ties in, quite a bit to COVID challenges. So, as far as COVID, we talked about this at several times during the discussion. But one of the things that I see is, the increase in e-commerce. It was absolutely incredible overnight. Some of the statistics I've seen is just absolutely astronomical, right? Why did that happen? Well, a couple things. Firstly, after the pandemic, we simply had to move to touchless payments, right? This was something that we were forced to do to actually survive. To be honest, where we were, we had to actually make it. We couldn't go in a grocery store. We had to make a touchless payment, pick them up outside. So if you didn't have those touchless payment platforms on your phone, you simply, you were extremely limited on where you could get food. So almost all of the population, or a significant percentage, were forced into touchless payment platforms. And what that did was that got the public used to those systems. It forced people to use them that probably would never have opened them up before, right? Secondly, we have a group of the population that have moved into that consumer role. Okay, so those millennials, we like to call them, but the age group, let's say from 20 to even 30, they're now, or even 18, even lower than that, they're now consumers, right? So they're on their phones all the time. They're used to technology, and they're used to these platforms. Okay. And third reason is these touchless payments people found are safer. Again, they were introduced to them during the pandemic, and they're a lot more convenient. So that's why I think those three things contributed to that increased volume in e-commerce. Now, what does that bring? It brings increased risk. There's no doubt in my mind. Okay, because what you have is all those things. Looping back to what we talked about in the beginning, bring data into a system, bring data into your world. You had to pivot into all these touchless new payment platforms, these new payment formats, and what that does is that creates more breach points, as opposed to maybe even 10% less coming in person to your bank or coming, to a bank. This is going to create those additional breach points for you and for customers as well. Because, the thing is we can't, we can't actually, do that customer due diligence that we did before. We can't actually meet a customer in person and verify their information, look at their ID, compare their face to that. There's so many pieces of technology now, the deep face technology and biometrics that can be used to actually alter photos. It's very, very scary, actually, right? And what that's forced us to do, it's forced us to rely on automation, okay, to verify customer information. One of the things I would caution is not to rely too much on that, to make sure there is a human touch point somewhere in there, because the more you rely on automation, the more vulnerable you're going to be. You have to have some touch points in there, absolutely. Like I said, harness technology, it's dangerous, but it's also there for you to utilize to your advantage as well, okay? Now, we talked about remote workers, huge threat. A lot of us had to pivot. A lot of banks had to, bring their employees, working from home, and that just brings a whole different threat level between VPNs, between servers. Basically, the level of security was lower. The standard was lower with just being able to penetrate into a system was a lot easier. People working from home became very comfortable. They're actually very comfortable now, even more than when they were in the beginning. How do we know? They leave their laptop on, and neighbor's not going to walk by and look at, certain bank information. And traveling. I've seen, I was just traveling last week, and I'm sitting next to someone. I'm looking at what they're doing on Excel sheets. It's unbelievable. I could have easily with a camera or a phone just grabbed some personal information from them. So it's very disturbing. How do we combat that? A lot of that comes from training, but I would definitely make sure that that's on everyone's radar, Wi-Fi and VPNs. Make sure you're doing those tech things, but also the human aspect of that as well. Check people's Zoom backgrounds, what's in their background. Do they have certain pieces of information behind them? Oftentimes I see that that's the case. So sometimes just those basic security things can absolutely help. Okay. And then we have cryptocurrency, huge flag. I talk about this all the time. I get asked probably once a week about this, about all different forms of crypto. It's just, it's mind boggling. The Bitcoins and the NFTs and all these things can be very confusing, but for a bank, it's just a totally new form of currency. So how do we manage that? And the issue with crypto is that, as many of you know, it can't be traced. There's no jurisdiction to it. Getting law enforcement involved is pretty much pointless. I know I've started to see some traction there, but not much. So I'd be very, very forewarned, and I would definitely create some flags with any type of crypto transactions, in any type of volume whatsoever, because there's a high propensity for fraud if you have any customer that's involved in any type of platform like that. And also too, like I talked about, fake charities, romance scams. A lot of our customers, unfortunately, do get duped by these. I worked with a couple of banks actually that, like for romance scams, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll ask to wire money. Okay. And if one of your customers is actually, and you can find this through outliers, is repeatedly transferring. Let's say they didn't ever make a transfer, but they request, $5,000, repeated $5,000 transfer, or $1,000 over a course of a month. It might be just a good customer service, protocol to maybe contact them, by email or even just ask them to come in if that's possible, because I have seen that as a very, very increased threat. And sometimes I've seen banks be able to take a very active role in, actually helping customers. And that's one of the things when I talked about the anomalies. The risk scoring, that's one thing you can do too with that is you can manage those high risk customers, but also clear all the others, clear the 90% that are coming through very quickly, get them done, get them out, make them happy, clear their payments, whatever it might be that they're doing. Okay. And then lastly, and I know we're approaching time before Q&A, so I just want to talk about this real quick, is training and awareness. This is just huge. I do tons and tons of training on this. And really, the whole secret to cyber breaches is human hacking, and just as I had demonstrated before, it's all about mind control. That's how they breach your system. We're definitely the weakest link. They use a lot of psych tricks. I'm just going to go through a few of them. They have about probably 10 or so that they use. And these are standard. If you were to look at any phishing campaign, any breach, this is how they've done it. I've looked at hundreds in my career. There's always one of these in there. Sense of urgency is one. They're going to give a countdown ticker. You have 48 hours, 24 hours. Your supervisor needs this money in an hour. They're going to give some sense of urgency because that brings your emotion in. Okay. Feeling of left out, everyone else in your office is doing it. All your other customers are doing it. There's a deep psychological need to be connected. All right. So they're going to somehow try to make you feel excluded if you don't engage in something. Okay. So this is what we call, feeling of left out. Authority figure. This is huge. And this is why I said, like, if you have vendors, they're going to actually use you as the authority figure towards your customers and towards your vendors. Okay. So, but we also see this with IRS. This could happen internally. You get a letter. Well, we say IRS. I mean, that's the regulatory environment here in the States, but, whoever might supervise you, they're going to maybe come up with a whole imposter letter or imposter site to send you through. Okay. And then baby steps, they're going to slowly walk you through the process, ask for maybe first name, last name, date of birth, social security number, over a half hour, an hour period of time. Okay. And then before you know it, you've been breached. Okay. And then some of the final ones we see are reciprocity, likability, and scarcity. Okay. And you can research these all on your own too, but some of those ones I talked about in the beginning were probably the first ones. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to my very end slide with just my contact info, and then but like I said in the beginning, I'm definitely and I'm going to turn it over to Cherise to maybe manage some questions. But yeah, my contact information is here. Absolutely, please follow up with me later. And Cherise, we're going to chat for another half an hour, half an hour still before that, but. So Cherise, maybe I'll turn it over to you for some maybe some questions.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. So we do have a few questions which have come in. I think the first one is from the Philippines. This person says, I've been receiving random calls from numbers coming from PNG, that is Papua New Guinea, and other countries. Should I be alarmed? Will it be a case of possible data breach attempt on my smartphone?
So a couple of things to think about there. So first thing I would do is I would somehow canvass your other employees in your institution. That would be the first thing I would do, to see if it's just a personal target against you or an organizational target. Okay, so once you figure that out, I think that's gonna help develop a strategy for you directly. So it'd be less of a threat if it's just to you. If you check with all your other employees somehow, or you're bring it up maybe to your supervisor, your immediate manager first, and then they can investigate. So I think it would be the best case scenario is no one else has been a threat in your bank, that it's just maybe you. So then I would do is I would maybe look at, keep track of the several. You said you had several. Keep track of the numbers maybe, and also watch your email systems or maybe other areas that they're trying to penetrate. So what could be happening is a couple of things. So let's walk through the scenario. So first off, let's say yes, you check with other people and they say, wow. Absolutely. This employee here has been targeted, someone else in the department. Wow, they're all coming from, Papua New Guinea, the same, code on the phone. That means that your company's been targeted. So there's been some breach point within your company. Someone's trying to penetrate your system. So what that means, if you think about where that, if all that data from your employees is housed somewhere in your company, so you have some sort of breach within your company. So what probably happened is, maybe they infiltrated the system somehow. okay, and they're watching what's going on. So that would be a big issue. And what I would do at that point is, talk to whoever is involved in maybe some IT security or cybersecurity platforms within your company, and try to isolate maybe where that data source is. If they're just focused on phone numbers, that's different than if they have phone numbers and emails. Okay, so that'd be a different data point. So try to find where the source is. Okay, and that might help identify where the breach is. Now, if it's just you, then it could just be, it could be something personal. Maybe you went on a shopping site, on your phone or something like that you specifically are targeted. So that would be that'd be more of a personal threat and less of a bank threat. But here's what's interesting. If it's all coming from Papua New Guinea, that means that there's something interesting going on in Papua New Guinea, some connection there. I had this recent case of a woman here in New York that called me, and she found out, she was looking through her LinkedIn. She had some interesting analytics where she had a lot of feedback well, this was about 2 years ago, but that she in the northern region of Russia. And it would have been more of a concern now, but even then it was. And she said, "Well, I have no dealing at all in Russia." So we tried to analyze what was going on, and we found it was just a couple of data sets that got released somewhere, and it wasn't a big issue. Okay, so like I said, I would start globally, walk all the way down. But then it's interesting that you said it's Papua New Guinea. So there's some overlap. See if you can find maybe some connection, either personally or professionally, with that Papua New Guinea. Maybe there's a vendor in that area, maybe a customer, a client. So that breach point could be there, but that's definitely a clue.
Thanks, Michael. Michael, the next question is by Ravinder, who asks, what are the important steps we can take to regain our customer confidence? So I'm assuming this is, after an attempt has been made on the bank. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, that's a very that's a tough question, I know, and this is why I understand that there, like I mentioned with those reporting statistics, that certain unfortunately certain companies just don't report it because they don't want their customers to know, because there is that confidence damage. There's no doubt about it, and I think one of the most important things is it's kind of like some of the tactics that they use that do work, in other areas. Let's say, mistakes that let's say athletes or celebrities or things have made, and that is to kind of admit the wrong, if you will, quickly. Don't try to cover it up, because then I think if you're trying to skirt it a little bit, make excuses, I think that actually lowers the confidence more. I think, if you come right out and admit, look, this is how it happened, this is what happened, but then also more importantly, make sure that you're explaining what you've done now, because I think to get the customer confidence back, if you're not doing anything different, that's what I'm going to think to myself. That's what the customer is going to think is, wow, if they've been breached, but they're not doing anything else, there's nothing stopping this from happening in the future. So I think what's important is to develop a stronger protocol, to come back and say, hey, look, yes, we did get breached. We apologize. We're sorry. This is a tough world right now, but this is what we're doing now. We've implemented this new data security. We have a data governance team. We have a whole new protocol for customer profiling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're here for you. I mean, to install that confidence back in them. But I think, I think just stating it is not enough these days. I think you actually have to show them something tangible, because, we know, unfortunately, the competition in our world is pretty fierce. They can hop to another bank, another institution, maybe very quickly. So that's what I've seen work in the past. But yeah, unfortunately, it's a very, very sensitive topic. Pretty much all the way around.
Thanks, Michael. Michael, the other question is about the Nepali banking industry, but I think that what has been described is probably true for most countries. So this question says the most common fraud cases are seen due to lottery scams from social media and messaging apps, where the customer shares their personal details and OTP, and their balances are transferred to some other bank account, who again is a victim of the same case. What do you suggest we do to control such cases?
Yeah, so Sharice, just to expand on that, like this, they talk about social media platforms using, like what would be like, you're talking like your personal social media platforms, or you mean the
Yes,
payment, like payment platforms?
personal social media platforms, or sometimes you get an OTP via SMS, right?
Mm,
Someone on the phone who calls you and asks for the OTP.
yep. And this is where I think couple things. This is one of the biggest challenges, when I talked about that pivot to all those new payment platforms. And I think this is why, potentially this is where, I think, you can do that, training to customers, which is important, but I think having some sort of backup technology shield, if you will, is really, really the key there, to have, it depends on how you're structured, whether you manage that internally or, you have a vendor to do that, but make sure that you have those, to identify that outlier, because that very well could be the key, the fact that maybe that customer never made that transfer in that format or that environment before, but maybe they are at that, at that particular moment, or they're doing it by, like you said, an SMS, clicking on a link and then it's taking them to a different area. And I think that's the whole key, is to understand, because that cognitive or that technology fingerprint that I showed, that's going to pick up on that. Okay. And I think that's the key, because that would be considered potentially an abnormal, transaction. It's also interesting too, with, and again, depending on, without knowing exact specifics, but, transaction amounts. So that's actually something really to key in on. And this is what we do, like when we look at, when I talked about those algorithms, those basic rule-based algorithms, that's why it's very important. So like, for example, most people, let's say, that have, automatic payment deductions, yes, those could fluctuate, credit cards, they're going to move around a little bit, but at the end of the day, a lot of the other, but you can still pattern a lot of that, behavior. So, the fact that, you have a couple transactions that come through for, what, like, let's say US dollars, 1,000 US dollars, 2,000 US dollars. In my opinion, that's kind of rare, because, again, thinking of a credit card payment, or a payment at a store, it's going to be, $5.19 or $6.19. But when you have those very even numbers, I think this is one of the things the fraudsters they don't really know about this yet, is a lot of times they'll try to round up or round off, where very often we don't, we really don't see that too much in the real world. I mean, just think about that the next couple of days you're out, how many things came to exactly that amount. So I think using strategically what is normal, not even for that customer, but most customers in your business, is really important. I mean, you might have, let's say, a perfect example of a counter to that. Let's say you have a lot of customers that are self-employed, maybe, and they're making checks to other people for $100 or $200. That makes sense, right? So that wouldn't be an outlier to that person. So that's why I talked about, if you develop that normal behavior, and then as soon as something abnormal comes through, to identify that.
Sure. Michael, there's one question which refers to some information that was on one of the slides. So this person asks, can you provide some more information about this point in one of your slides? The point was 96% of targeted attacks are designed for intelligence gathering. So maybe you can expand a bit more on that.
Yeah, and that was, when I saw that statistic, it was, again, it kind of counters what we see in the news and in the media, because, what we assume is that those attacks really are focused on the financial gain, right? But those are the, the big ones, the ones that make the news, that other 96%. So basically what that means is that, and actually I'll let me go back to that slide, because it had some other interesting stats on there. That was, yeah, this one here, the phishing statistics. So basically what they're trying to do is, we talk about intelligence gathering, and it's a very loose term, but what they're looking at is gaining some sort of intelligence for, it could be for financial gain, but they're not looking for that financial gain at that specific moment, okay? Because what I see is, a lot of these organizations, especially the phishing campaigns, most phishing campaigns are not like what we call our mom and pop originated fraud. So this isn't, some 20, 30-year-old, developer that's having a bad day and just decides to send out some phishing campaigns. We do see that a little bit. But that's not, if my opinion, all these people on that call, that's not what I would consider a threat to you, because your system is going to pick that up. The threat is the highly organized crime rings, and they are really the precipitus of a lot of these phishing campaigns, because what they're doing, I was involved in a recent case, and it originated down in South Africa. And what they were doing was they were sending out the volume of phishing emails they were sending, and they were actually targeting areas where you are, also in Dubai. So they had specific targeted areas that they were looking at, and they were sending out volumes of these. I mean, in mass. So that was their strategy. The second they got an engagement back on one, they would then target it more. So it was kind of like, then it would go into a different queue and then change it. So in any event, what they do with these is they realize that, to just simply, do a phishing campaign trying to get money is kind of it's a one-off. It's a quick, $1,000, $5,000, because they can't, if they ask for too much in those phishing campaigns, an employee is going to escalate it. Right? They're going to think it's really not, like if you were to get an email saying, Sharice, can you wire 50,000 American dollars right now? This is MIG. I need this for the next conference. I don't know, something like this, right? You're going to, wow, 50,000, like that's crazy, right? But if it were $20 or 50, you might not even think about it, right? You might say, yeah, you're busy, and just go ahead, wire it, you click the link, and that's the end of it, right? They don't make money on the $20, right? They make money on those big hits. So what I'm getting at is that's why they look to get that intelligence first. They rather get, Sharice, they rather get your name, your login, your password, because then what they can do is they can watch what you're doing for a few days. So instead of getting $50 from you, they can, now they can access 5 of your systems. They can access all your customers, your sales force, your personal connections, that's really where they're going to make an impact. And what they're going to do is two things. They're going to either, one, look to conduct identity theft on their own with that. So they take that information and they hop out and do their own thing on the side without you knowing, or they take it, and we see this all the time, unfortunately, they sell it on the dark web. They post it. It's unfortunate. We in the pandemic, there were fake vaccine cards on there. It was just, there's so many things that are on the dark web. It's actually scary. But they'll sell your information, and they'll actually make quite a bit on it. But again, you have to look at it at who's actually precipitating this. This is not someone looking to get $20 or $30. This is someone that's looking for the big win from you by still remaining under the radar. So it's incredibly disturbing on all accounts.
Right. All right. So I'm actually waiting for my $50,000. Okay, there are two related questions. One which says, as we all know, data is the most important asset of the bank right now. So does that mean that a secure IT infrastructure is the most important investment needed that the bank should focus on? And there is another related question which says, what is the most, sorry, I think I've lost that question somewhere in the whole list of questions. But what that question, the other question really said is it more important to focus on the investment in IT infrastructure or on training of employees? What
Mm.
would you higher preference to?
Okay. Yep. Yep. So like you said, both related. I'll answer both kind of together. I think I would say, in my opinion, so the question is, how important is it to focus on data? Is it the most important thing? I would say yes. And the reason why is because what I am seeing is maybe not at this specific moment, but with some of those statistics I showed with the trajectory, that is not leveling off. It's not going down. It's all about data, and it's going to continue. I see, there's so many terms now. Data is the new oil. We've heard this. So this is bringing so many. I've seen in the last 3 years, 2 years. It's getting increasingly higher. 3 years, 2 years, and 1 year. More startups that are in our area, in the fintech area, that are focused on just anything, getting data here and selling it to us for this and using. I mean, it's just incredible. And a lot of these startups have no experience in banking or in the financial institution. They're just looking for the new oil. They're looking for the big win from a monetary perspective. So what I'm getting at is drawing so many people into the world on that way. That front. But secondly, from a crime perspective, I see, back in the day, 25 years ago, when I was investigating financial crime, where it was insurance fraud, banking fraud, I had many cases where we would follow the money right back to terrorist cells and things like this. But now, but they were also that was only a small piece of it. Then they were involved in, still the traditional kidnapping, treason, drugs, the traditional organized crime, crimes. Now, I would say that has shifted to almost all. I would say probably 80% of the organized crime rings focus on financial crime because it's easy. It's easy for them. They don't need. It's less dangerous, less risky. There's no prosecution. They know this. They run like corporations. They can run lean and mean. And try to target you and target us. And how they do that is not, they don't rob banks like that. It's too dangerous. They actually try to infiltrate and, the systems through social engineering and phishing. So I would say absolutely focus on, like I said, that two angles: protecting your data, but then also using it to your advantage, because you can do both at the same time. Like I said, like an example of using it would also be developing a system so you take care of your customers even quicker than you used to. You can green light and risk score a customer so they're happy. You can process payments and get them moved through and happy in milliseconds, where they didn't, you couldn't do that before. So you can use it on both ways. It's not only just a threat. But yes, I would absolutely, focus on data. Make sure it's a high priority coming up, because this is what I see with companies that are starting to fall behind. It's kind of like the bicycle; they're getting a little bit slower, but pretty soon they're gonna be at the end of the pack. They're not even going to be keeping up with the rest of us, and it's going to be too late soon. Second part of that question: do you focus on IT or training? So here's what I see. I see companies that, like, let's say they come in and one specific bank I remember I had consulted with, and they were kind of a newer bank, they were implementing some new payment platforms, some kind of exciting things. Didn't have much banking experience, but boy, they had really robust data scientists, and these were developers from your MITs in the United States. Your top institutions. And here's the thing, their system within 2 years was not strong at all. It wasn't, because they just didn't know the business. They didn't know things that we talked about for the last 2 hours. They didn't know things you all know about your customers and about our industry. So what you have to do is you have to have people that know these systems, but also are connected with your IT folks. Okay, so what I recommend always is, make sure you have a strong IT. But also make sure you have what I call them translators. Those people that know the business. Like all of us on the call would be probably great translators. Like you know that business so much, you can tell the IT folks just like I had said, some of those patterns, to know, hey, all of our customers log out at, or our internal employees log out at 8 p.m. Anything after 9 is okay, but hey, some of our customers log in after 9. So, someone that knows your particular bank would be extremely important. But I don't think you can focus solely on one without the other. I don't think you can dump everything in IT, because if your employees don't know what's going on with training, it's going to fall short. And I think vice versa. If you focus just on that human element and don't focus on IT, the best banks, the strongest banks work on both in concert with one another, like moving up that walk or crawl, walk, run. You don't have one running and one crawling. You have both moving up together. I think that's really the key to a successful counter fraud program for a bank.
Right, Michael, let's just take one last question because we're almost at the end of time. So this one is, if you would like to travel to the Philippines, Michael, this question says, do you conduct fraud sessions for companies? If yes, who can we reach out to for inquiries or arrangements?
Absolutely. Yeah. And yes, I do. And I love, we were chatting about this before we got on. I love traveling to your region. Prior to the pandemic, I was probably in your area, I would say once a month or so. And I truly enjoyed it from every aspect culturally. Your regions are so warm, and also too from a business perspective. I really enjoy working with your areas on things again that I'm seeing in other regions as well. So yeah, to anyone, absolutely, I appreciate that question, and yeah, absolutely to anyone. My contact information is here. Please reach out to me directly. Hopefully when things, now we can, we've been doing a lot of things, of course, on Zoom. Remote is fine. We can operate perfectly that way, but of course, hands-on is great. And fingers crossed, we were talking, hopefully I'm going to be out your way potentially in the summer. But yeah, for any specific needs, be more than happy to do that. And also too, like I said, I have tons of publications and stuff I do for free. On my website and email. So definitely do that. And also too, as we were talking about early, if you want to send me an email, what I can do is I can send you, I have a good chapter of my book that talks specifically about a lot of these topics, those outliers. So you just want to send me an email, I can send you that chapter of the book. It's a PDF. We can get that over to you. Okay. But yeah, no, I'd love to connect with anyone that needs assistance. Absolutely.
Great. Thanks, Michael. So Michael, thanks for being on this session. May I request Mig to do the closing remarks? Mig, over to you.
Michael, thank you very much for the presentation. I think it gives us a really clear view of what's going on in cyber security with the banks. The challenges are big. The problems are big. They're migrating from the physical world to crimes, basically online and in cyber. And this is an issue that will remain valid for all bankers in Asia. As we all know, we have many cases already that we know, and there are many more that we don't know, or that we can guess something happened. So as part of this constant training of ABA, we will continue in this path of more cyber for the rest of the year. So I hope that the audience keep paying attention to our emails and joining these activities, because this really enhance the professionalism of bankers, members and non-members, because we have a lot of banks here who are not members of the ABA. But thank you very much. It was fantastic. And now let's go ahead. Sheesh.
Thanks a lot, Mig. So with that, let's close the session today. A couple of announcements again before we end. One is that the assessment will be sent to all the participants by Monday, I believe. And if you clear that successfully, you can get a certificate. You will have to log on to Fintelekt Academy to do this. I think many of you are members of Fintelekt Academy already. And whatever questions were not answered, we are going to request Michael to answer them offline, and hopefully we'll put a document together and share it with Mig so that he can send over to all those who attended the session today.
Yeah.
So that, Michael, thank you so much again for being here today. I think it's probably midnight for you now, so you need to.
Is it midnight? Yes, it is.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
midnight.
yeah. See, I said I could talk on this for hours. You could keep me going all day. Yeah, I love it.
The coffee works.
Yeah, you're right. It's right here next to me, Mig. Yes, very, very, very true. But no, this was a pleasure. I love dealing with you guys, your group, and everything. I'm more than happy to help you guys out however you need it in the future. So thank you very much for the opportunity. It was great, great chat. Thank you both. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Great.
Sure.
Bye then. Take care.
Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.